During the 1930s, a terrible drought struck Texas and the Great Plains. This one was different from any drought in the past.
Childhood in the Dust Bowl, surviving America's darkest economic time. When we look back at America's Great Depression and the Dust Bowl, most history books show us ruined farmland and endless breadlines. But lost in those black and white photos are the millions of children who lived through this era. People whose childhoods were stolen by hunger, dust storms, homelessness, and work beyond their years. In today's video, we reveal what life was really like growing up during America's hardest times, through their daily struggles, grit, and hope for the future. Economic context. The collapse hits home. By 1932, a staggering 1 in 4 Americans was unemployed. That's about 15 million people without steady work or income.
Drought says men are sitting in the parks all day long, out of work, muttering to themselves.
Breadwinners who once held factory or farm jobs suddenly found themselves penniless. Banks collapsed, homes were confiscated, and farmers, devastated by failing crop prices, faced closure and ruin. Entire communities across Oklahoma, Texas, Kansas, Arkansas, and Colorado watched as their land turned to desert and their livelihoods destroyed. This did not just mean hard times for adults. Children bore a heavy share of this burden. Many became homeless or had to leave school to help their families survive. Malnutrition had skyrocketed, and many kids were growing up much smaller and thinner. They were prone to illnesses like rickets and pneumonia. Some children were left in the care of relatives or orphanages as families broke apart. People were no longer able to support even their own young ones. In farm towns, the collapse was paired with ruthless drought. Farming families, who were already deep in debt, lost not only cash but the very food on their table. Dust storms buried crops and poisoned livestock water supplies. Soaring dust clouds, sometimes hundreds of miles wide, would blacken the sky midday very often.
The dust is lifted up to 10,000 feet. Powered by high-altitude winds, the monster rips across the country looking for prey.
This nationwide economic collapse, together with this natural disaster, meant American children were often pushed into adult responsibilities overnight. They were forced to grow tough just so they could survive day after day. Daily survival. What kids face day to day. For many Dust Bowl children, every single day revolved around survival. Meals often became boring and monotonous as they were made from whatever scraps were left around. Thin potato soup or onion broth was stretched across to feed many mouths. There were very few hearty stews or roasts. People had to get creative with what little food they had. They stretched watered-down milk, turned stale bread into filling meals by soaking it in gravy, and also made big pots of Hoover stew. This was a mix of cheap pasta, canned tomatoes, and whatever cheap sausages they could find. When even those humble dishes weren't possible, some families took desperate steps. They boiled weeds and wild plants, caught rabbits when they could, or searched the countryside for berries and fruits to give kids anything fresh to eat. Backyards turned into small gardens in the dry dust, where children helped plant beans, corn, and squash. They learned quickly what could grow in poor soil and how to switch crops between seasons to get as much food as possible. Finding clothes every day was just as tough. Empty flour, cornmeal, and animal feed sacks were cut and sewn into shirts, skirts, aprons, and underwear. They were sometimes printed with bright flower designs so they could be reused, as this was becoming a common practice in those years. Moms patched together or handed clothes down from older kids. Shoes were often old and worn and stuffed with cardboard to cover holes or passed from sibling to sibling. Even through all this hardship, neighbors helped each other get by. Families swapped eggs for vegetables, mended one another's clothes, or combined coins to buy big bags of basics. Children quickly learned teamwork and sharing. They were soon trading backyard chores, carrying wood together, or borrowing a bit of sugar when needed. Emotionally, these hard times weighed heavily on kids. They knew their families depended on them. Many saw hunger, sickness, or their friends losing homes. This forced them to grow up fast and made them tough and resourceful. Living in Hoovervilles, shelter in Shambles. As the economy collapsed and drought ruined farmland, clusters of shabby camps called Hoovervilles popped up across America. And as you could tell, they were named angrily after President Hoover. They appeared near train tracks, on riverbanks, and at the edges of towns and cities. These rough camps became the last hope for thousands of families with nowhere left to turn, including children suddenly left homeless. Some families built their shelters from utter scraps: soggy cardboard, rusty sheets of metal, old tree branches, broken boards, and tar paper. Most huts were tiny, with barely enough space to crawl inside. When it rained, the dirt floors turned to sticky mud. There was no way to keep out the baking heat of summer or the icy winter air. At night, people burned trash and weeds. Life in these shanty towns was tough, especially for kids. There were no toilets or running water, so sickness spread quickly. Diseases such as lice, dysentery, and tuberculosis were common. Getting clean water meant hauling heavy buckets from faraway streams or public taps. Still, for all their struggle, Hoovervilles were diverse places. Black, white, Latino, Native American, and immigrant families lived side by side for the first time. Everyone was equally hurt by the Great Depression. Children made do with what they had, kicking around flat, worn-out balls, tying newspaper scraps into makeshift kites, or collecting bottle caps to play games with. Older children took on bigger responsibilities. They helped repair the shacks, gathered firewood, fetched water, and babysat their younger siblings. They watched as neighbors traded food or shared tools, childhood experiences, working years before their time. Unlike today, when most children spend their time learning at school or playing with friends, children during the Dust Bowl years mostly focused on helping their families survive. From a young age, they had to work hard and make sacrifices. Boys and girls looked everywhere, in alleys, junk heaps, and backyards, for scrap metal like old cans, broken farm tools, and rusty car parts. They sold whatever they could gather by weight, earning just a few pennies, but making the most out of others' trash. Others sold newspapers on busy street corners, shouting headlines, and trying to catch the eye of the rare person with money for a paper. They worked long hours under the hot sun, covered in dust, and crowded by other desperate kids doing the same. Many children traveled with their families as migrant workers in faraway fields and orchards out west. From sunrise to sunset, they picked cotton, tomatoes, or peaches. Families lived out of battered tents or wagons, often moving from farm to farm. Girls who stayed at home helped their mothers by sewing worn-out feed sacks into dresses or aprons, or sometimes trading vegetables at some local market. Some learned how to fix old shoes with scraps of leather, saving every penny their families needed. Other kids often took the role of substitute parents, babysitting younger siblings, running errands, and giving up schooling because families depended on their help more than their education. Even so, play did not stop entirely. Kids made do with what they had, molding clay into marbles, creating corn husk dolls, skipping stones over ponds, or chasing each other along dusty roads. But most of their time was filled with chores, hunting for odd jobs, and doing anything possible to ease their family's burden. Emotional impact. Growing up too fast. Kids growing up during the Dust Bowl had to become adults much faster than normal. Instead of carefree days playing, they constantly worried about going hungry, having sick parents, or even whether they'd have a warm place to sleep that night. Living through tough times like the Dust Bowl definitely affected kids emotionally. Many felt bad about eating when food was limited or thought they weren't doing enough if they couldn't help earn enough money. Some dealt with health issues such as being smaller than average or getting sick from not having enough good food. Even with these challenges, many children became more resilient and inventive. They learned how to repair shoes with scraps, take care of younger siblings, and stretch small meals to feed the whole family. Seeing neighbors of all backgrounds helping each other taught them cooperation, kindness, and how a community can work together when times are hard. These experiences stayed with them into adulthood. A lot of people who grew up during this time became very careful with waste, saved anything useful, and were cautious about money, habits that sometimes carried on into the next generation. Thank you for joining us as we explored what it really meant to grow up in the Dust Bowl era. If you found this story thought-provoking or inspiring, please like, subscribe, and explore more of history's hidden corners. Sometimes the greatest strength is found in the smallest voices, and those voices from America's hardest times still have a lot to teach us today.